Good evening, everyone who's joining. We can get started. My name is Joe Colangelo. I'm Hanover's Town Manager. This public meeting will last from 6 to 8. We have a hard stop at 8 o'clock because there's a select board meeting that's going to start then. We're going to plan on doing the presentation part of this in about 30 minutes and leave at least 90 minutes for public Q&A. Just want to start off saying that the town of Hanover has owned the property since the 1970s. And as the property owner, the town has been monitoring closely the work of the project manager, Tetra at the site through the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, MassDEP, who is performing oversight of the cleanup efforts. Beyond the town's monitoring efforts, we have also ensured full and complete transparency of the information and activities associated with the cleanup. I know that not everyone believes that all the information is available, but all information associated with this site has been made available to the public on the town's website. Additionally, the town, as property owner, is fully committed to seeing the cleanup effort through to completion so that the town's 130+ acre parcel will ultimately become a place that the public can enjoy as a walking, running trails, open space, and parkland for generations to come. So we're going to go into the presentation part of this. I want to introduce Miss Debbie Marshall-Hewitt from MassDEP. She is the Audit Section Chief for the Department's Southeast Regional Office Bureau of Waste Site Cleanup in Lakeville. She has worked for MassDEP since 1995 and has been the Audit Section Chief since 2003. Prior to joining MassDEP, Ms. Hewitt worked at a private environmental consulting firm where she was responsible for overseeing field drilling operations and various media sampling events. In addition, she served in both the Army and Air Force for a total of 30 years and retired in 2016 as Chief Master Sergeant for the Massachusetts Air National Guard's 102nd Intelligence Wing based out of Joint Base Cape Cod, Massachusetts. After Ms. Hewitt presents, we'll go right into Dr. Ron Marnicio from Tetra Tech, who's going to talk about the cleanup activities. Dr. Ron Marnicio is Tetra Tech's national lead for the technical discipline of risk assessment and has worked on many sites being remediated under Massachusetts contingency plan. Ron has been the Tetra Tech project manager for the fireworks site for the last 15 years. So we'll go right with Ms. Hewitt, and then we'll go right into with Dr. Ron Marnicio, and then right after that, we'll go into the public Q&A. For public Q&A, you may either type your question into the question and answer box, and we'll answer them as they come in, or you can raise your hand and we will let you in to ask your question on camera. So Ms. Hewitt.
Okay, thank you so much, Joe, for that introduction. Good evening, everyone. I'll be presenting the MassDEP slides on the background, responsible parties, and the regulatory phase process. So I only have 12 slides, of which 10 of them really have the information that I'm going to run through with you tonight. So next slide, please. So site background. The site comprises approximately 240 acres, generally between King and Winter Streets. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the area. And also I should mention some of these slides and this information was presented in the fall of 2019 when we did public meetings both in Hanover and Hanson. So this is basically a refresher on some of these slides. Historical activities at the site included research, development, manufacture. This was for the United States government. There was some commercial manufacture of civilian fireworks, as you see here. Also other non-munitions related manufacturing that occurred from 1907 to 1970. And contaminants, as you can see on the bottom bullet there, mercury, lead, organic solvents, propellants, explosives, quite a few things were used in the manufacturing operations at the site. Next slide. And several companies, including National Fireworks, operated at the site until, like I said in the previous slide, 1970. An industrial park currently operates in the northern eastern portions of the site. And as your town manager, Joe Colangelo, mentioned, the town of Hanover purchased approximately 130 acres of the site, and that was back in the 1970s. Next slide. This is just a general schematic, approximate site layout of the site. You'll see some more in-depth and zoom-in type of pictures when Tetra does their portion, when Ron gets into his portion. But basically, this is meant to show you that the manufacturing was mainly in the northern portion of the site historically. Storage mainly in the central portion, a little bit of overlap into the northern and central areas. And the testing and disposal took place in the southern portion of the site. Next slide, please. And particularly responsible parties, we have the Fireworks Site Joint Defense Group, which is comprised of National Coating Corporation, MIT, Kerr-McGee, which if you take a look at these points below, the Tronox filed for bankruptcy in January of 2009. That created the Expendable Trust, which was established for the reimbursement or payment of response actions, and that happened back in February of 2011. Our MassDEP commissioner is the trustee who determines reimbursement, and the response actions are being paid out of this expendable trust right now. Also, a potentially responsible party, the U.S. Department of Defense, comprised of the Army, the Air Force, and the Navy. And all property owners where site contaminants have come to be located for all sites in the Commonwealth. And that applies here to the fireworks site too. Next slide, please. Also, I know I'm covering a whole lot of information in a very short time. At the end, there'll be plenty of opportunities once we get through the presentations, like Joe mentioned, for questions. This is an overview of our regulatory phased process. And as you can see by some of these bullets, MassDEP, we're tasked with ensuring the cleanup of oil and hazardous material through the statute, through Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 21E, and the Massachusetts Contingency Plan, which I'll refer to. The acronym is MCP. And licensed site professionals under the MCP, they oversee site cleanups. They're hired by the potentially responsible parties. They conduct the investigations, recommend necessary actions. They also document information and reports, and that's submitted to MassDEP via our eDEP website. And in this case, Larry Kaz, who works for Tetra, is the LSP on this site. And typically, MassDEP provides oversight through audits. I'm the audit section chief in the Southeast Regional Office. I have a section of folks that conducts audits state in the Southeast region. But in this particular site, due to the complexity of the site, MassDEP is providing direct oversight of response actions. It's not typical of very many sites at all, but this includes work plan reviews for this site. And we are doing this direct oversight throughout the phase process that I'm going to explain. MassDEP reviews and authorizes reimbursement also that comes out of the expendable trust for response action costs at the site. Next slide, please. So this is one of two slides that just outlines and gives you a brief overview of what our regulatory phased process per the MCP is like. So we have this phased approach to investigate and clean up oil and hazardous material. And what I'll do is just cover a couple of these. Some of these points, like I said, that really apply to all sites through the phase process. Obviously, we have some specifics in here for the fireworks. Phase one, that starts off as initial general site information, history, hydro information, IRA evaluation. That acronym stands for Immediate Response Action, and we'll get into that in a couple of slides. And also, Ron from Tetra will get into a little bit more in depth on the IRA. Phase twos are meant to be comprehensive site assessments. They basically define extent of contamination and they explain the risk characterization. And for this particular site, the supplemental or the final phase two was submitted to MassDEP in July of 2018. The phase 3, you see that this is here highlighted in blue, mainly because that's a response actually that happened most recently. And the phase 3 RAP, the Remedial Action Plan, is an evaluation and selection of cleanup alternatives. And that's ultimately to achieve closure at the site and what MassDEP refers to as no significant risk. So the final RAP was submitted on December 4th of 2020 and then conditionally approved by MassDEP in June of this past year of 2021. Next slide, please. And here again, you see that phase 4 is also in blue, just to kind of highlight that that's where we're at right now with the fireworks site. So the Remedy Implementation Plan, also known as the RIP, provides engineering design, construction plans, and specs for the response. It also has operation maintenance and our monitoring of the selected cleanup alternative. It documents the plans. The phase 4 RIP, the Remedy Implementation Plan, is due in July of this year. And then once that happens, the site will move into phase 5, which is operation maintenance and or monitoring. And the monitoring also determines the effectiveness of the cleanup alternative. And then ultimately, we want all sites in the MCP, this one included for sure, to get closure, which could be a permanent or a temporary solution with or without conditions and activity and use limitations, the AUL's ID restrictions. I can tell you right now, this site is not headed towards a temporary solution. This will be a permanent solution, and that's the goal for this particular site. Next slide, please. Regulatory phase process. So I mentioned about the phase 2. Some of, again, is just kind of a refresher on phase 2 that you're certainly welcome to ask questions later on about that. But basically, mercury, lead, and VOCs, volatile organic compounds, were detecting various media across the site. Next slide, please. And this just summarizes a little bit of some of the phase 2 risk characterization findings, that no public or private water supply wells were impacted by the contaminants. I think really the key here is no exposure equals no risk. And any potential risk that was in the direct contact with the southern portion of the site, that area is restricted and patrolled by the Hanover Police Department, as I'm sure many of you know. Impacted soil will be excavated and disposed of off-site. And then as far as risk to people, feeding birds, wildlife, there has been a fish advisory in place, and that has been since 1995. So that's been in place for a while. And there will be a remedial action plan to remove impacted sediment. There are unexploded munitions that were recently identified in factory ponds, and thus access is restricted for everyone's safety until that removal can be completed. Next slide, please. And the MCP also mandates the implementation of immediate response actions. So I mentioned this in an earlier slide, IRAs, and that's to eliminate imminent hazards, which are basically immediate threats. In this case, the munitions response work that's currently ongoing at the site. There's a process for unexploded munitions removal. And in the future, this will likely include an activity and use limitation, which is very typical of sites that have had ordinance in them. And this will include signage and a public education program to recognize, retreat, and report. That's known as the triple R's. So Ron from Tetra will get more into the IRA, like I mentioned previously. And the MCP does provide for public involvement opportunities at various points throughout the phase process, even more so with this site. That includes this particular meeting we're doing tonight to keep everyone in the loop on what's going on. And last slide for me. And basically, this is a slide with contact information. You see the MassDEP contact information on the left, including myself as the project manager, and then the Attorney General's office, who has been very involved with the site as well, that you have their contact information. And I will be happy once Ron wraps up to answer any questions at the end. Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks, Joe.
Okay, thank you, Deb. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to be talking about two things tonight. I'll be presenting some summary information on the Phase 3 Remedial Action Plan, or RAP, as you've heard, and also providing you an update on the ongoing munitions cleanup activities. Next slide, please. Just as a review, the Phase 3 RAP that Deb spoke about that was conditionally approved included a definition of the site-wide remedial objectives and remedial goals that were developed to clean up the contaminated soil, sediment, and groundwater at the site. The RAP defined a set of candidate remedial alternatives that would achieve these goals and objectives, and included an evaluation of those alternatives using the MCP specified comparison criteria. And the RAP led to a recommendation of one of those alternatives to achieve what we call the final remedy, although many names for that, but the cleanup of the ponds and streams. The RAP included a conceptual design, a general technical approach for implementing the work, a budgetary cost estimate, and a schedule for implementing the alternative. Next slide, please. The final MassDEP approved report is posted on the town's website at the address shown here. Many of you have been closely following the evolution of the Phase 3 report. There are a couple of important points to keep in mind with this final version. First, the cleanup associated with the final remedy assumes that the munition response that's ongoing to remove the explosive hazards from the upland and the pond areas is completed first. When explosives items were encountered in Factory Pond in 2018, the cleanup of the area known as the high metal density area, and I'll come back to this in a little bit, was taken out of the scope of the final remedy and incorporated into the current munition response, the immediate response action that was mentioned earlier. Next slide, please. The final remedy was designed to remove the chemical contamination from the impacted sediment, soil, and groundwater to protect the current and future site users, and also the local aquatic and terrestrial ecological habitats. After incorporating a series of technical refinements, additional sampling results, and considering the public comments that were received on the 2019 draft RAP, two viable alternatives remained. Alternative 2 was to clean the site up to achieve the site-specific remedial objectives and goals, and alternative 3 was to clean up to achieve the local background conditions. Next slide. The evaluation of alternatives that was performed in the RAP showed that these two alternatives were equally rated relative to 5 of the 9 MCP specified comparison criteria. Alternative 2 was rated better for the factors of feasibility of implementation, cost, and for resulting in less aesthetic impact. Alternatives 2 and 3 were equally protective of aquatic sediment-related species, while alternative 3 was protective of more upland soil-related species. Alternative 2 approached background for soil and projected conditions very close to background for sediment. In consideration of all of this, feasibility and cost supported recommending alternative 2, and MassDEP later approved alternative 2 as the selected remedy. Next slide, please. Here's a brief snapshot of what alternative 2 involved. Removal of about 36,000 cubic yards of contaminated sediment and 2,300 cubic yards of contaminated soil, followed by restoration of the areas and ecological habitats that were disturbed by the remediation. The RAP had a cost estimate between $65 million and $95 million, with a best estimate of $76 million. That range is defined by the central value or best estimate minus 15% and plus 25%. MassDEP's best estimate was a slightly higher number at about $85 million. It's important to note that for either estimate, approximately 75% of the cost was associated with the offsite disposal of the contaminated sediment and soil. The schedule in the RAP indicated implementation was to take place over 2 years once the field work started. Next slide, please. All right, I'm going to switch gears now to talk about the ongoing munitions response work. The munitions response started in the spring of 2017, and it expanded rapidly across nearly the entire southern part of the town's property as more and more buried items were uncovered. The upland munitions response work was extended into Factory Pond in June of 2018. And the munitions response work has been ongoing without interruption since 2017 with the continued support of the Hanover Fire and Police Departments and the Massachusetts State Police Bomb Squad, despite the COVID pandemic. Next, please. The areas in color on this map, this is a map of the southern part of the site that you saw on Deb's earlier slide. The colors on this map show the extent, excuse me, of the munitions response work. It involves roughly 34 acres of upland area and 11 acres of ponds and wetlands. The colors indicate the types of munitions areas that we've encountered. The yellow areas were part of the former test range. You can see the firing point to the left there at the point, and then firing it, fanning out to the berm on the right. The red areas contain burial pits or disposal pits. The blue areas had historically less documented munitions activity and have been found to be generally less contaminated with munitions. However, no area so far has been completely free of munitions in this entire area. The black areas in the center there are where Tetra Tech is conducting the cleanup, processing, and administrative operations. As you can see from the little box in the lower left corner, we've remediated almost 55% of the impacted area already and have started on most of the remaining area, about 42% of it left. So we're well on our way. Next slide, please. I wanted to give you some of the quantitative metrics that might also give you a sense of the scale of the operation that's been ongoing. These numbers were accurate through last week. We have recovered and destroyed over 17,000 items that were known to be explosive or potentially explosive. This destruction was through the Massachusetts State Police Bomb Squad performing controlled disposal shots, and there's been 537 of those to date for the project. In addition to the explosive items, we've also recovered 153,000 and change inert munitions debris items. These are items that would not explode, but they are parts and pieces of munitions items that were also present. You can see that the ratio is roughly 1 explosive item per every 10 inert munitions related items that we recovered. The recovered munitions related items, once destroyed or inert, are sent off site to be what's called demilitarized, which means they are either melted or shredded so that they no longer appear to be a munitions item, and then they're recycled. In addition to the munitions items, we also are handling a lot of soil. We have tested and found over 10 tons of soil to be not meeting the criteria set for on-site reuse as backfill. That soil has all been disposed of off-site. The good news is over 36,000 tons of soil was clean enough and met the criteria to be reused on site. We have over 4,500 tons of soil, an estimated number that is likely to contain some amount of asbestos fibers that we will be processing in a controlled way later in the project. Just finishing up this slide, we recycle whenever we can. We've recycled over 100 tons of concrete debris, clean concrete debris, and 48 tons of steel plates. I put here a very large amount of trash and junk, and the significance of that is that when munitions items are mingled in with other metallic debris, the detectors pick up all of it, and you can't tell that any particular metallic item is not a hazardous munitions item until it's separated out and physically inspected. So that's a laborious process that needs to be very systematic. Lastly, some of the hazardous items we found at the site are made up of aluminum or plastic and are not detected by conventional detectors that only detect iron. Next slide, please. Looking ahead at what's planned for this season in the upland areas, you see an aerial there with three numbered locations. Area 1 is what we call our northeastern remainder area west, high density area. It's quite a mouthful, but the work in there is essentially done except for the backfilling, and that's likely to start later this week. Area 2, the work that's another area that's had a number of disposal pits in it. That work will be ongoing this spring and possibly into the summer. That work's over 50% done at this point. And additional work will be also in portions of the upland area where the 3 marker is. It should be noted that each work area has specified exclusion zones within which only the UXO technicians assigned to that area can go. Consequently, other workers and support contractors cannot enter these areas when work is in progress. As a result, the munitions response work is typically performed in multiple areas at the same time so that teams can remain productive and move around as exclusion boundaries change with the work. Next slide, please. The planned activities for this season in Factory Pond is going to focus on that area I named earlier, the high metal density area. It's shown in this figure on the left as the pink area. We performed a marine gradiometer survey of the pond a while back, and it indicated the presence of a large amount of metal along the eastern shoreline and around the Greenway footbridge. Further investigation showed that some of this metal included potentially hazard munitions items. You can see a selection of some of that in the pictures there. Next slide, please. So removing these munitions from the pond, from this portion of the pond, will be accomplished using what's called a portable dam like this one. This picture in the slide is not at Fireworks, but the system, the portadam system there will look exactly like that. Once this portadam is installed, the area behind the portadam will be dewatered, and the contaminated sediment, the munitions, and the metallic debris will be dug out. Environmental monitoring of the ambient air and the And the pond water will be performed throughout these operations to make sure that conditions remain in acceptable levels. The excavated materials will be screened and processed on the shore, just like the materials dug out of the upland area are done now. And the contaminated sediment will be disposed off-site. The remediated area will then be backfilled in accordance with the Hanover Conservation Commission requirements, and the area will be reflooded and made isolated from the rest of Factory Pond with some temporary sheet piling until the final remedy is completed in the rest of the ponds and streams, so that this area does not become recontaminated. Next slide, please. Performing this work in the pond has required the approval of several regulatory and oversight bodies, more than has been required for the upland work so far. These include the Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act, or MEPA office, more groups within MassDEP, the Hanover Conservation Commission, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. All applications for the required permits or licenses have been submitted. The permitting with 2 of the 4 groups that are noted in the slide as complete in green have been successfully completed. The other 2 groups of permitting applications have been sent in and are currently in review. The plan is to start this factory pond work sometime in March or April, pending all approvals, and we anticipate a work duration of about 6 to 8 months. Next slide. Ambient air monitoring for particulates and volatile organic compounds will be performed at multiple locations in the work areas and at the property boundary. This map here is a little bit busy, but what it's showing is some tentative locations that we've identified in blue for particulates and in yellow for monitoring the volatile organic compounds as part of the planning. These tentative monitoring points have been identified based on what we know now, but they'll be field verified at the time the work is performed based on real-time local wind directions. We have a portable meteorological station that's been operating at the site for almost a year now to track wind direction and a number of other atmospheric conditions. And that system will be used to tailor this monitoring. Next slide, please. Here's the wind speed and direction data that we collected for this past year for the months of May and August of 2021. They call these plots wind roses. The angle of the triangle indicates the direction from which the wind is blowing. And the farther the wind triangles extend out from the center, the more often the wind is blowing in that direction. The yellow and red portions of the triangles indicate faster wind speeds or higher wind speeds. And as you can see from this, these wind roses show fairly similar wind direction and frequency at the site in May and August, but stronger winds in May. So we'll use this information to tailor the monitoring locations to be sure that we capture any impacts from the work area and anything that has any potential for getting off site. Next slide, please. The complete munitions response work is scheduled to wrap up in 2024. The 2 big areas that are planned for 2023 is what's called the shoreline disposal area and the northern disposal pits, which is right alongside of the factory pond shoreline where the high metal density area is, and an area of impacted wetland that's marked where the number 2 in the right-hand picture is there. And the final areas with known munitions will be addressed in 2024. The sequencing of these areas has been determined in consideration of the exclusion distance requirements and necessary material flows associated with each area, and the logical consideration of which cleanups needed to occur before which other ones. So I'd like to turn it back to Joe now for the Q&A.
Great. Thank you, Debbie. Thank you, Ron. So I do see that we have a question in the chat from Eric Grund, but I see Julia Tragworth has had her hand raised. So why don't we let Julia in for a question? I think do I have to unmute her? Julia, I think you're muted. Are you ready?
Sorry, that was a complete mistake on my end. I did not mean to raise my hand, but thank you.
Oh, okay. All right. So we will go to, thank you, Julia. Yeah, well, I'll go to Eric Grund, his question. So Debbie or Ron, I don't know if this might be best addressed to Ron potentially, but we'll see. So Eric Grund, what specific contaminants, in parentheses, chemical names, have been found, amount of each substance, are known substances determined, are unknown, substances determined, what they are, and if not, why? Where is that list found? Where can the public access that? Has radioactive material been found in what forms? Is there a list of what chemicals, materials, and other toxic substance where known to be on site? So Debbie or you or Ron might be able to take a crack at some of that.
I'm sure, yeah, and probably Ron and I can work on this, but I'm wondering, Joe, I was tempted to cut and paste a link. I know it's only hosts and panelists, but is there any way to post the link to MassDEP's EDEP website specifically for the site? I guess maybe that's a question for Steve, but.
Well, we'll definitely get, if it's not on the website now, I think a lot of this information is available on the Hanover website.
Oh,
but,
yes. Okay, that's, yes, great point. Eric, if you go to the Hanover Town website, there are many, many links, lots of great information. It is a fantastic e-repository of lots and lots of information. And you could go to what's called the phase 2. I talked about the supplemental or the final phase 2 report, where all of the contaminants and known substances are listed in there. I was trying to post the website here, but like you mentioned, it is on the Hanover Town website. And I think, Ron, I know there's a question here about radioactive waste, and I know that there's been quite some investigation out there. I'm not sure if that's what you were planning on, just kind of summarizing that for Eric.
Sure. I think anybody who's followed the project for a while knows that there was always a kind of anecdotal report that there was radiological material buried kind of in the central storage part of the site. There had been various efforts over the years with MassDEP to take detectors out there and look around. We were asked as part of this immediate response action to actually do a more systematic investigation of that area. We developed a work plan that was reviewed by MassDEP and Massachusetts Department of Public Health, the group that oversees all the radiological work in the state. And we dug out where the material was indicated to have been buried at a depth of about 4 feet. The cutting to the answer is that we did find some buried drum remnants, but no radiation above background levels for the area, either in the soil or released in the ambient air. So it's possible that material had been buried there many, many years ago and had subsequently been dug up, or it was really never there. But that area has been investigated using all the requirements of Massachusetts Department of Public Health radiological sites.
Thank you, Ron. I see also Eric has his hand raised, so you might have a follow-up, but I want to go to Stephen Carroll. Can we call Stephen in? All right. Mr. Carroll, you're up.
Hi, Joe. Can you hear me?
I can, yes, loud and clear.
So thank you. And I'm happy to hear some progress is being made on the remedy plan and bids coming in July. But my question is really probably to DEP. I'm not sure if anyone from the Attorney General's office is on. But back in 2018, I sent a Freedom of Information Act request into DEP. All I was looking for was a simple accounting of what was in the trust account and what it's been spent on to date. And about 2 weeks later, I did receive an email back from someone from DEP, a woman by the name of Margaret Shaw. And she said she'd have to send me a thumb drive of the information. So I did receive that thumb drive. However, it contained thousands of pages of materials that one would really need to be a forensic accountant to quite honestly figure out what was what. And really all I was looking for was an Excel sheet. I wasn't looking to drill into each category. That information was never provided. I brought it up in the 2019 public meeting, never got a response. Worse than that, in 2016 through 2018, I was on the fireworks site focus committee, and we had monthly calls every month with the Attorney General's office and the DEP. And we asked about this, and including former Selectman Brian Barthelmess specifically asked about what's going on with this. Why can't we get this information? And we were always met with stall tactics, delays, and excuses on why the state could not provide this information. Again, all we were looking for was a simple Excel file that said what's been spent. It's $70 million in the account. You would think someone at the state would be tracking this. The lack of transparency on this is mind-boggling to a town that pretty much has a Superfund site, and we can't get the state agency to tell us what's been spent to date. I'll be honest with you, this isn't contributing to the lack of trust from the residents on why we think this is taking so long, and the property's never going to be cleaned up. So could someone please take this as an action item and post this online? Town Manager Colangelo, you said that it's full transparency. I think the town owes a right to see this amount and what's been spent to date. So I'd like to have someone take the lead in answering that question and also providing the information in a suitable time frame. Thank you.
Okay, so
Thank you, Mr.
so
Carroll. Do you want to jump in?
Joe,
Or I mean, I can as well, Debbie, but go for it.
yeah, I'll just comment on Stephen Carroll. Thank you for the question. What I have tonight for everyone who's tuning in is an update on the Tronox expendable trust funds. The status as of January 18th. So this is the most recent status we have right now. The contributions to the trust that includes interest equals a total of $72.3 million. The total dispersed amount, so the interim balance we have right now is $40.3 million. The projected remaining balance in the trust, that would leave $36 million. That's where we're at as of January 18th. I'm aware of the request that was put in, and I know that we did have, MassDEP did have a number of resources looking into that information. And I know that some folks are probably tuning in here. I'm not sure if there are any further comments, but I did have that update as far as the trust and where we're at as far as the funding as of recently.
Thank you. And I think all we're looking for is, there's been over $30 million spent. I think we're just looking for a breakdown on where it's been spent. A concern that I have is if we're looking at a remedy solution that's north of $80 million and there's 30 million in the account, what happens? Who's paying that extra $50 million?
Yeah. Okay, so I can comment on that as well. So this gets really into the status of negotiations that MassDEP and the Attorney General's office is having with other potentially responsible parties. We're currently working with other responsible parties to reach a negotiated settlement. There are ongoing negotiations to cover this gap in funding. MassDEP and the Attorney General's office, we're very confident that funds will be secured since all parties are really committed to moving forward. All parties are acting in good faith, and all parties are moving forward as expeditiously as possible. And I know that expeditiously to us doesn't probably mean the same thing as it does to you and a lot of the folks in both the towns of Hanover and Hanson. But you're right, Stephen, you mentioned Superfund site. This certainly meets qualifications for a Superfund site. It's not a Superfund site. It's in this moving through the state system. We're overseeing the cleanup. We have this money in the expendable trust that is being, all of the money in this trust is being spent. Believe me, MassDEP gets invoices. We go through invoices. We really have spent a lot of time and resources managing this site. People at pretty high levels, section chiefs like myself and Lenny Pino, who didn't have a presentation piece tonight, but he is available also here on the panel for questions. We have a deputy regional director looking and helping out with this, people from the Attorney General's office, other staff, our Office of Research and Standards. I have not managed to cite anything to this equivalent where we really are acting as expeditiously and together as a team as much as possible. And like I said, this gap in funding, which you just noted, yes, $36 million that is the projected remaining balance in the trust that will not get us through the phase 3 cleanup. You just heard Ron Manisio talk about the estimated cost for the cleanup, but our negotiations right now with other potentially responsible parties will get us there. We're very confident of that. I don't know, Joe, if you wanted to add anything to that, but I just wanted to add that piece since Stephen brought up the piece about the funding.
No, that's the answer that I understand as well.
Yes.
I think the only thing I would just follow up with that, Deborah, I'm not questioning any of the expertise level at DEP, Tetra Tech. I know everyone's working hard. I just think as a resident, we should understand what the money has been spent on. North of $30 million. I would only ask, can you just provide us a summary of that? That's it. A simple Excel file would work. Thank you.
Okay, and I will also mention, and probably Ron could better speak on this, but the ordinance in the munitions removal has been such an extremely high cost. MassDEP or really anyone, we did not anticipate this at all. This was initially intended to be a rather short removal action, short on time. And then this was started back in 2017. It had to switch over from one type of response action over to this immediate response action that Ron talked about in his presentation. And that's really to make sure that there is not some type of immediate threat to people out at the site. And really it's just so expensive that, again, we did not anticipate that. And that is really what is taking up millions and millions of dollars for this cost. So we're really trying to get to a point here where we can get the funds secured so that this cleanup can move forward, continue to move forward. And that's, the munitions piece was just something that we did not anticipate. I don't think anyone did.
Yeah, I want to go on to the next question from Eric Grun, but I would just say I think Mr. Carroll's request is very fair. It's certainly a public record, and so Mr. Carroll, on for you and on behalf of the town, we will certainly publicly make this be the public request to Debbie and DEP to provide that level of detail and make it available. That's a very fair request, and it seems like that's something that we should be able to get.
Thank you, Joe.
So, thank you. Eric, you've got your hand up. Got Eric. There's Eric. Eric,
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
All right. First of all, I'd like to thank everybody on this call for holding this call. It's great transparency, definitely much needed. There's a lot of talk around town, and sometimes the talk can be, filling blanks with misinformation. So it's much appreciated that you all are providing this information. And a lot of times, a lot of citizens just don't have the time to dig through reams of data. So your summaries are super helpful, even though we're all really concerned, but life tends to keep us busy. So that's my preference to this. But some of the basic concerns I've seen expressed by a lot of town citizens are the actual contaminants there and the impact potentially in the past and present and future to their health regarding like water supply, things like explosions and ways of disposal, as far as disturbing things that have been chemicals that are in the ground and how that all is handled and how that can really affect their health. And, I think that we can all probably spend a whole career researching this, but your summary, and I think that transparency, like specifically you mentioned, there was radioactivity brought to the site, but finding where that is, there's been some work on that. And I don't know if it's able to be done or whatever. So thank you for answering that question. And you said there's a list of materials that have been found, and I'll try to look for that. But if you could share that in the chat, that would help just citizens get to answer questions. So sorry for the long-winded question, but I think the health and safety and how this project is affecting that and what's here is critical to the citizens.
Debbie, did you want to respond to that?
Yes, that's great. I believe that when I posted that link, and I know Erica can definitely appreciate that is a whole lot of information for the general public to be able to get through. It's a lot of information for MassDEP, and we're specialists and experts in this particular area. What I did do was post mentioned about the Hanover website that has a whole lot of information. It looks like Brenna Roberts also put the link that I was attempting to put out there as far as the specific information for the fireworks site. So there was a lot of information. We tried to summarize as much as possible on the slides tonight to give you the basics for sure. I know you mentioned water supplies on one of my slides that we covered information from the phase 2 and also from the phase 3, but water supplies were not affected by the contaminants from the fireworks site, not private water wells, private drinking water wells, or public water supply wells. So we did definitely look into that. The explosions piece, that's a piece of the remedial efforts right now. Is that the safest way once munitions are found? They have the state police bomb squad on site that Ron could definitely speak a little bit more about that. But this is for the IRA, the immediate response actions. And in order to safe those munitions when they are determined to be active, they're blowing them up. They're detonating them on Fridays, and the town is posting all of that information on how many detonations and between which hours they'll occur. And I know that this is a huge inconvenience for people who live nearby. It's disturbed people. It's disturbed their pets, and we are sensitive to that. But that is the way that these things are being removed from the environment and taken from the site so that the area can be safe both now and in the future. So I'm not sure, Ron, if you wanted to say any more about that.
Yeah, just a couple of points. It's on you, a couple of points. First, you saw on my slide that we've found over 17,000 explosive or potentially hazardous items. That's a very large number in an absolute scale. That's on par with military bases and other things like that. And if you talk to, when we discussed this with your public safety officials at the beginning of the project, and it was clear that there was a preference to not be transporting these things on public roadways if we could find a way to destroy them in a controlled way at the site. And so that was the direction taken. The State Police Bomb Squad is following all of their protocols for that. There has been an evolution over the course of the project to continue to reduce the sound or the vibration associated with the detonations. There is a cap on the total amount of explosive material that's involved in any single detonation, and the amount of cover put over the detonation. So a lot has been done to minimize the impact on our nearby neighbors. We understand that. And I think just based on the most recent period of time that we haven't heard much from our neighbors. So we think we're taking care of them in that regard. But detonating on site really was the preferred approach for the overall safety of the community.
Thank you, Ron. I don't see any other current hands raised, but we can wait for some more questions. Oh, we got one. Let's see. Oh, Mr. Carroll again.
Hey, Joe. I think this question is probably more for the town, but my knowledge is that there is about $7 million in natural resource damage funds that are attributable to this project. Is there someone at the town level that's coordinating an effort to seek these funds for projects related to fireworks? I would be concerned if a town, no offense to Norwell, but if Norwell applies for funding because they're in this watershed and they get money, we're the ones that have dealt with this contamination in this property for a long time and waiting for the cleanup. So I want to make sure someone has that on their radar in the town to apply for those funds.
I guess I can answer and say yes, Steve, we are aware of those funds. Those are managed also through DEP, through a different source or grant opportunity. I don't think anyone on this call from DEP is part of that area of DEP, but we are aware of that. And yes, you're right that those, I think it is about 7.1 or some amount of monies thereabouts that is available. And yeah, we're working on trying to get our share of that.
Okay, thank you.
I see Selectman Luco has hand up.
Hey, Joe.
Hello.
Hi. Yeah, I appreciate everybody putting this meeting together tonight. You know, it's a really good opportunity to get some information out to the public. I'm sure a lot of people are tuned in. One thing that I see coming up a lot in conversation, you know, on social media and in person, is about the pond. And I know that a lot of consideration has gone into, you know, how to handle the pond and how to handle that disposal area. But I'm wondering if Ron or Jennifer could walk us through what, you know, Hanover is going to be left with in that pond. You know, how much of that pond is going to be cleaned up and explain to people in Hanover, what we're going to be left with when this cleanup is finished.
Yeah, thanks for the question. If you remember from one of my slides, there was that mapping of the gradiometer that showed the pink areas, which were the highly concentrated metal. That survey also identified a couple of hundred individual locations within that what we call the factory pond range corridor on either side of the firing line that was shown in yellow there. We have had divers in the pond. We had them out in the pond this past summer, and they dove on the 200 and some anomalies that were located by that survey that were outside of that concentrated pink area. A number of those were munitions, but a lot of them were not. They were just metallic debris of some sort. So when we talk about the ponds, we're talking about either the concentrated area that we are hoping to get into in a couple of months here this year, the high metal density area, and then the remaining areas that were the individual anomalies, some of which were munitions, some were not. Obviously, by excavating out the entire pink area, that's the high metal density area, we intend to be removing all the metallic debris and munitions down to the depth that we keep seeing it. We think that's going to be about 3 feet of sediment. So behind that portadam, we are shooting at removing all of the hazardous materials. And we believe we have already removed many of the hazardous materials that were individually located in the pond with our divers this past summer. There are a couple of areas around the Greenway footbridge that we will be hitting at a later date, just because of the preferred sequence of operations on what things should be done in what order to be more effective and efficient. So when we are done with the munitions response work, our objective is to eliminate all the imminent hazards due to the munitions. The second part of the project, what we're calling the final remedy, is to go to complete the work for the chemical contaminants, and which in large measure is mercury, some lead, some other compounds. The removal of sediment from the area outside of the munitions response area is aimed at making the pond safe for public use, for recreation, and to make it suitable for the ecological receptors that make use of the pond and live in the pond. So when both the munitions response and the final remedy is complete, there would be no restrictions on the use of the pond. As Deb mentioned, any site that has had munitions will have some sort of cautionary activity and use limitation, potentially about disturbing sediment at the bottom of the pond, or if some sort of boat launch or something is to be considered for construction, that the plans consider the areas that we've cleared, and if it's going to intrude deeper than that or farther than that, that some check be made on that. So we're intending to make this pond back into something that's very nice and safe.
Yeah, I saw the pink area about, north of the bridge and then around the bridge. and I know you're working on the area north of the bridge, but yeah, I was concerned about the area around the bridge and south of it. So I'm glad that, that is in the plans for future excavation. Especially if, people are out there walking and the bridge is a nice, overlook where people are going to be, stopping to look at the pond if it's still there. And, last thing you need are some kids, wading in the water there next to the bridge and be, coming across munitions and, even stepping in, mercury and lead tainted sediment. I think you guys have the immediate response action, under control, and that's your effort right now.
And that area outside of the immediate response action area, that portion of the pond all is earmarked for between 6 and 24 inches of sediment removal. That to remove the chemical contamination. There's been extensive sampling all throughout the pond, and so we have a pretty good idea of how deep the contamination goes in all parts of the pond, and the design of the sediment removal is accordingly to get all the pond down to the chemical specific remedial goals. Most people probably are not aware, but the bridge that used to be where the Greenway footbridge currently is didn't go away. It's buried underneath. And we know that there's munitions down under that old bridge as well. That's why that part of the work is phased a little bit later, because some different equipment is going to be needed to pull all of that stuff out of there to be able to get to the munitions that remain.
Well, yeah, it's a complex project, and I appreciate you guys that you're being very thorough. And I said this meeting is really good for transparency, and hopefully all the funds needed come through to get it as clean as you said, we can expect. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Luco. So I think, Ron, this question might be for you. You've probably touched on this a little bit, but I think the one question from Mr. Barclay is, I guess specifically, I know you probably can't give this exact answer, but maybe you can touch on it. How much longer will this cleanup process be?
Certainly touch on it. As you saw in my slides, we think that the munitions response element of this is going to wind up after the 2024 field season. So that's part of this. As Deb mentioned, the work on the design of what we called the final remedy, or the cleanup of the rest of the ponds and the Eastern Channel corridor and the wetlands, that design work has begun. A first cut at that is due in July of this year, as she mentioned. I'm sure there's going to be some review and revisions to that. But we hope that within a few months after that the design has been worked through, and then the process of, while that's going on, all of the permitting that we're doing now with the MEPA office, the Conservation Commission, the MassDEP, Army Corps of Engineers, is going to have to be revisited for the design that ends of the final remedy. We have phased that permitting first to address this work in the high metal density area of the pond for this year. But when we go to do the final remedy, a much larger area is going to be impacted. Many more acres of land, both underwater, land that's currently underwater. So I don't mean to go in circles, but after the munitions response is complete, or actually while it is being completed, we are doing design and we're going to be getting back into the permitting. And then that, I'm guessing, a couple of years to get that completed. And then it's scheduled for, or it's projected to take 2 years of field work. So
Ron, can I jump in just to follow up on that question? I mean, I think when you answer that, permitting and all that, gets a little bit kind of like bureaucracy speak. And I'm sure, I mean, my understanding is we have another 3 years of munitions cleanup to look forward to. And, beyond that 3 years of munitions cleanup, can you kind of give a ballpark? And I think, understanding that it's impossible to know everything about how much, after the 3 years of munitions cleanup, how much longer will the environmental cleanup take after that? Do Hanover residents have a decade of cleanup to look forward to? Half a decade of cleanup to look forward to? I mean, what can people expect?
I don't own a crystal ball, but I'll give it a shot. I think the design, permitting, and implementation of the final remedy is probably 4 to 5 years. And that's being started now while the munitions response is being done as well. So I'm guessing about 3 to 4 years after the munitions response work is complete.
So just for residents who are keeping the math, so it sounds like another 3 years of munitions cleanup, followed by roughly 3 or 4 years of environmental cleanup. So we can all do the math, 7 or so years until completion. And that's certainly not a guaranteed timeline, but that's at least as of today, a realistic possible timeline to look forward to. It's not going to be cleaned up tomorrow.
I mean, I'm sure you can appreciate the fact that you really can't go in and do the conventional environmental cleanup, with the dredging or the excavation of the sediments, if you think there's still potentially explosive items in there. It's very difficult to get people to bid on a job in a situation like that. So it is always the case that you have to deal with removing the munitions hazards first, or as we're doing in the pond, taking care of both the explosive issues and the chemical contamination at the same time before generally you go into the conventional environmental cleanup. It's just not safe for the general worker to be exposed to that kind of situation. The UXO technicians deal with it all the time, and that's why they're doing what they do.
All right, thank you, Ron. All right, the next hand I see up is Viola. I'll see if Stephen will let you into this meeting. 50-50 chance. Oh, he let you in. Okay.
Yes, it is. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. I happened to find some materials dating back to 2006 when I was a selectman. At that time, we knew that there were high levels of lead azide and mercury. And some of that made it very difficult, as this gentleman has just said, for assessment. Moving on, I hear everything that he has offered. I think it's important for transparency for people who are concerned about the progress of the project, that we have an idea as to who the contractors are who are good enough to work in that area and who's hiring them, number one, so that we can more or less follow the work. We did ask for some statistics from the state back in 2006 or thereabouts regarding cancer rates, and found that the town was about level with other communities. And our cancer rates, not specific just to the Factory Pond area, but the town as a whole, excepting for prostate cancer. And we all know that our rate was slightly higher. But we also know that there was vast migration into the town from other parts of the state because the town just exploded with growth from the 1985 period onward. That being said, moving on, we also know there was legend that people just threw test tubes into the water from areas where they were doing research. Some of the stakeholders in mitigation to get them to clean this up. And that was just anecdotal, and that there were bombs and there were other things in the pond that made it very dangerous. My main question for DEP, I believe, would be, is it wise to try to go down into the silt? My understanding is you go down 30 feet and everything's clear, but we're talking 3 or 4 feet. Is there really any end to what they may find, or is it practical to cap the pond, as I have heard, and build a golf course or do something like that with it? Where does all that stand? I'm sorry I missed the beginning of the meeting. Those are the 3 questions. Is there any discussion about capping the pond and doing something that will elevate home values? These people have suffered enough. Or is this the only way out, to spend years and years trying to go through silt, not knowing if there really is an end to it? Who are the contractors and how do we follow them? Thank you.
Thank you, Vi. Good questions. Debbie, you want to take a stab at some of those?
Yeah, sure. So I know, so hi, Viola,
All right, thank you.
sure, let me attempt on some of these questions. So as far as capping the pond, did you say golf course?
Well, whatever. I have no idea. I had heard golf course, a possible golf course. Again, this is all anecdotal, so I don't know. I'm asking you, what are the possibilities? What are our options as a town? Is capping a more practical and safer alternative to trying to sift through silt? And some people are of the opinion that that sifting will never end, because all of this pollution dates way back more than half a century, probably almost 3/4 of a century, to World War II.
Yes, absolutely. And in one of my slides on the site background, I had information where basically the manufacturing and all the processes that resulted in this contamination at the fireworks site transpired from approximately 1907 to 1970. So that's a significant amount of time. Most releases we have in the Commonwealth, it's just one quick release, or it's certainly a much shorter time frame than, over 60 years worth. So that's a significant time frame, and you're right. Had to do with world wars, military operations. Of course, when the military is training and manufacturing, that's to save lives also. And it's extremely unfortunate that this became the location where a lot of these munitions and ordnance and mercury ended up coming to be located. So basically, a number of things went into how we're at the point now where we have, as Ron Manisio explained, the alternative to, as far as excavating and removing contaminated sediment. And we've heard actually from quite a few people in the town of Hanover, a number of residents who would like the pond to stay. It's a great recreational resource, and to drain the pond, or to put a golf course, or capping, I think maybe that's why Ron just kind of tuned in, that wasn't something that was going to be nearly effective or feasible. And MassDEP is very comfortable with the alternative that we're at now. So I'm not sure, Ron, if you had anything to add on that point.
Yeah, I just want to clarify with Viola. When she said capping, it kind of sounded like maybe she was talking about filling in the pond, to make more land. What we did evaluate early on in the process, instead of digging all of the contamination out, was what's called thin capping, which would be putting a layer of material down in the existing pond to serve as a barrier to keep people and ecological species from it being exposed to the contamination. It doesn't remove it, but it can contain it. That it turns out that there were two reasons why that was not pursued farther. One was that the factory pond is a very shallow pond, and these thin capping remedies do not hold up well with thin, shallow ponds as they do in deeper ponds or lakes. Secondly, prior to the trust, the people paying for the remedy don't own any of the property here and couldn't be responsible for maintaining a capped underwater situation. So there was an issue with the implementability of that kind of remedy, that there would be nobody there that would take responsibility to maintain it. So if that's what you were talking about, capping, we did look at capping the contamination in place instead of removing it and disposing of it off-site, which is clearly an expensive way to do it, but it's gone. And you don't have to worry about storm events, stirring it up or anything like that. I wanted to make one other comment to something that you said, Viola. We have characterized the sediments throughout Factory Pond and the Eastern Channel Corridor and Indian Head River. We have a pretty good idea of where it's contaminated with mercury or lead or some other compound and to what depth. We can't in good conscience put our workers into a place that we don't know what it's like. So we do that both to focus the remedy onto what needs to be done, and also for no less reason than to protect our workers as well. So we have a pretty good idea there. And we also have a pretty good idea of how deep the metal is in Factory Pond in that concentrated area, such that, and that depth includes both the debris metal, probably from the demolition of some of the facilities, and any munitions. So it's not our way of working to start a project and not know how it's supposed to go. So we've done a good bit of characterization, a lot of characterization, to understand what needs to be done and where and how much work is going to be involved. The person that talked about the cost accountability, all of that work goes into estimating those costs. So I hope you have a better sense that we have characterized what we're facing here, and it isn't going to be, kind of a dig to China thing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. All right. Looks like there's a Heather with her hand raised. All right.
Hi. Hello?
Hello. Yep, you're
Hi.
on.
Okay, so as a resident of Hanover, with like I'm sure a lot of people are on this call, small children have no idea half the technical stuff that's coming out. So as a resident, why would we not want a superfund or a superfund status when a superfund takes about 5 years to clean up? And from the slides, it shows that there's still 42% that they haven't cleaned up.
Okay, good, reasonable question. Debbie, do you want to chime in on the pros and cons of that?
Yeah, sure. So thank you, Heather, for the question. As far as Superfund site, a number of years ago, MassDEP did enter into quite a few discussions with both EPA and with the town of Hanover leadership and management at the time. And that was a potential option, but it was the town of Hanover who specifically requested not to have this go the Superfund route. So, MassDEP, certainly, I know I mentioned earlier, and Ron has gotten into detail on some of the costs and some of the alternative that was chosen. And we're really putting a lot of time, effort, and resources into this. And it goes back to that initial decision that was made when the town requested that this not be a Superfund site. And I've also seen on other sites, Superfund sites, that often do not take just 4 or 5 years. Sometimes Superfund sites take upwards of 10, 15, 20 years as well. So it depends on the contamination and how many different contaminants there are, what type of media, multiple media. But yeah, Superfund sites can also take 20 years or longer. So we definitely have seen that on other cases.
I don't know.
I guess I would probably just add to that, Deb. Any aquatic Superfund site involving contaminated sediment is always much longer than one that just involves contaminated soil or potentially a groundwater plume. Ordnance sites of 40 acres or so are not common. So this would be a long project regardless of the framework in which you tried to clean it up. So I understand your point, Heather, but I think the 5-year average really doesn't apply to a complex site like Fireworks with the sediment, the upland areas, the commingled munitions with the chemical contamination, and basically it being a public property. It's always easier when it's a federal facility and you can control things much better. I guess that's my comment.
Okay, thanks, Ron.
So then just to follow up on that, it seems like, I don't know how long this has been going on, but the prior woman that was on, she said she had been dealing with this since 2006. So we're already 14 years in. And I feel like the residents that weighed in on not wanting the Superfund, maybe half of them don't even live here anymore. So I guess the question is to the town manager, is that something that can be opened up to the public? Because this is obviously a huge issue. And I feel like a lot of people have wanted a Superfund status. I just don't know why we haven't gone that route.
Well, thank you for that question, Heather. My understanding, and Debbie, you can chime in or not, is that, at this point, the decisions that were made in 2006, 2005, whenever, certainly everyone involved was working in the best interest of the town. My understanding at this point, if we decided we didn't want to go the DEP route anymore, that in essence, work would stop. And I don't know if there's a guarantee of when it would pick back up again if it went to the federal level. So I think in 2022, anyways, that by not continuing to manage it through state DEP with the settlement monies that are available would really put the cleanup efforts way behind where they are now, because everything would just stop. And then it wouldn't pick back up again until whenever the federal government decided they were ready to pick it back up. I mean, Debbie, I might be simplifying things. And certainly I don't want to mischaracterize anything, but that's the way I understand it.
Yeah, we definitely don't want any type of work stoppage. I mean, the Tetra is working on this site for the responsible parties right now. The work is moving forward. I know I mentioned early expeditiously, and expeditiously can mean a lot of different things in the broader perspective and broader picture. But the EPA were involved, so this goes back even further than 2006 when you're right, an earlier resident mentioned something about discussions back in 2006, but EPA was looking at this site back in 1984. I mean, this is going a ways back. Like I mentioned in one of the slides, the manufacturing stopped about 1970. And US EPA came in the 80s, took a look at the site, and DEP was conducting limited type of sampling also in 1993 and 1995. Notices of responsibility were issued back in November of 1995. So this has quite a history, but right now, as opposed to where we've been for the last couple of decades, with the plan to move forward, there's something concrete. We have funds that both MassDEP and the Attorney General's office is working with other responsible parties and negotiating a settlement, and we're moving forward. We're just in a good spot as compared to where the site has been in the past. So I'm not sure, Ron, if you had something to add to that too.
Just yes, briefly. Heather, if there was an opportunity to change, for example, from a state-led project to Superfund, in all likelihood would not mean that EPA would pick this up right where we are now and move forward. And just as Deb had those slides that said, the MCP has phase 1 and phase 2 and phase 3 and all of those steps. Superfund process has parallel steps like that. And I was involved in a project, the Gayhead Lighthouse on Martha's Vineyard, and there was a discussion as to whether this was to be handled by EPA or by the state. And neither side, both sides wanted to follow their process. So it ended up that all of the investigation and the sampling had to be documented to the procedures of both programs. And it quite honestly was a horror show. And as Deb said, it was a long process for the initial phases of investigation, but since 2017, it's been moving at a pretty good rate compared to almost any yardstick. And so, while the discussion of Superfund, it's probably not really a feasible option this far down the road.
Thank you, Ron.
So let's see. I'm going to go with Vi. Oh, wait, Vi is she in? All right. Is she in? Okay. Yes. Vi, you're back.
Yes, hi, I'm here now. Viola Rice, and I'd just like to chime in that as a selectman from 97 to 2006, this was prominent on our docket all the time. There was no magic cure. There was no way that we could more or less demand that this be immediately fixed, because we're talking about MIT labs, we're talking about the federal government, we're talking about people who use that industrial area, as the DEP rep indicated, from the beginning of the century through to 1970. We knew that we were more or less, and I'm speaking again anecdotally only as I recall, and I may be incorrect, but we felt that we had to cooperate and garner the most cooperation and the most that we could get from the entities who are responsible for that pollution. We knew it was going to take time. It didn't happen overnight, and unfortunately, it still is an issue. Our biggest concern, of course, was for the people, the stakeholders who lived proximal to that property, to that body of water, and to their values, and not having them lose money or lose health because of this. I just don't know if there's any other way to say this. So the progress has been slow, but the damage was done over such a long period of time, and it's so great that we hoped to get a resolution as quickly as possible. And this is the route that the town chose to take. I don't know if that helps at all, but it wasn't something that was ignored or something that was not given a lot of attention. It was right on the list. That's why we asked for surveys from the state indicating cancer rates and this kind of thing. We wanted to know, as I believe all select boards that were on for a long period of time, exactly what our exposure was, to use a pun. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vi.
Okay, yes, thank you. And I just wanted to add to that. Yes, you mentioned the timeframe 1997 to 2006. And as I had on one of my slides, the expendable trust was established in February of 2011. So only at that point did there exist a very large sum of money and enable both MassDEP and the responsible parties to move forward with conducting response actions, which is still occurring to this day. So that, and I haven't seen that whole lot of times in the past either, where a big company goes bankrupt and you have such a large pot of money, so to speak, that response actions can be conducted out of. And so that piece was definitely a good thing, that money is there and available, and it's being utilized every day with the response actions being conducted out there. I want to add that piece in, Joe.
Thank you, Debbie. All right, we got a few hands raised. Some are second-time questioners, so I'm going to try to get to the first time before we get to any second time. So Natalie, can we call Natalie in?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Thanks so much. This is Natalie Bedgen, 55 King Hill Road. Thanks so much for everyone that has coordinated this effort to bring us all together. This is not to disparage any interested or involved parties, but this is a very large, as we all know, complex and coordinated effort. So having said that, I have a two-part question. Who owns the overall responsibility of this project, like at the macro level? And my second question is, what person or entity is working on this project with the sole interest of Hanover, beyond that of Joe and the select men and women? Who's working on our behalf? Who, if I was saying it to my friends, I would say, who has our back?
I think maybe the first question about, I'm sorry, I might be paraphrasing this, but who is responsible for the cleanup? I hope I'm not taking too much.
Not really the cleanup. It's more about the project implementation, start to finish. The cleanup I see is a part of the project, but there's the funding, there's the allocation, there's the resourcing, there's capacity planning. I mean, the cleanup is the goal as I see it, but at the macro level, who is the project manager? Who owns this?
Yep, good question. So Debbie, I would say that's DEP, but I guess you can answer for yourself on that one.
Yes, sure. Well, first, I want to just mention that responsible parties. So I know I probably had this information in one of my slides, but anyone who owns a portion of the site or the site itself is a potentially responsible party, then that goes back a number of years. As far as communications, MassDEP and the Attorney General's office we do have monthly meetings with the town to keep everybody updated on the status of the cleanup, to field any types of questions or concerns. And so when you ask Natalie, who has the town's back, other than the town having their own back, I'd like to think that MassDEP and the Attorney General's office has the back of all towns and municipalities. Certainly when we're working on these projects, we're diligently working with the contractor, working with each other, different parties within MassDEP and the Attorney General's office to expeditiously move the progress and the response actions and the cleanup of this site as quickly as possible forward. So I would say that we definitely have the town's back too. And the overall responsibility, again, that expendable trust has been set up with those millions of dollars. But certainly the overall responsibility for cleanup, that is really up to all the responsible parties. And right now, certain responsible parties are conducting the cleanup. So under Chapter 21E and the statute in Massachusetts, responsibilities is joint and several. And right now we have parties that are moving forward. And so that is definitely sufficient right now for the cleanup, is those parties who are moving forward. I'm not sure if.
Well, I guess I would chime in on Natalie's, about who has the town's back. I mean, Natalie, there's 5 elected select board members who are actively engaged. There's 7 individuals on the Conservation Commission that have been engaged in this process in one form or another. Fire chief, current and previous, police chief, current and previous, myself. So, the town, we do have a seat at the table. While we're not the project manager, we are ensuring, like I said, that the information becomes available to people as quickly as possible. And when there are concerns that come up about health, safety, general welfare, we act on them as quickly as possible. And certainly we share the information as soon as it comes out. So, I would put that plug that there's more than just 1 or 2 people from the town who are engaged in this. So
Yeah, and it certainly wasn't to discredit anyone from the town. I know everyone's working really, really hard on that. It's really about like the outside entities who has ownership and who really has. I certainly know you and all the select men and women are advocating and working really hard for all of us. It's really beyond the borders and parameters of us as residents and leaders in the community who's looking out. But I think I got the answer, MassDEP and the Attorney General. So that's helpful. Thank you.
that's right. You got the answer. Thank you, Natalie. All right. So I'm going to give everyone about the 10-minute warning here because we do have a hard stop at 8. I apologize for that. But I see that Selectwoman Nyman has a hand raised and she hasn't asked a question yet. So let's, Selectwoman Nyman, are you in? There you are.
I'm here, Joe. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
So I just wanted all the residents and everybody else to weigh in.
I think we might have lost you. Or am I not hearing anything?
Just letting folks know that back in 2010, 2011, I was a former member of the state. I was a state legislator. And at that time, it was the local officials, the members of the Board of Selectmen, and all local people that had garnered me to discuss the situation at the Hanover fireworks site. We all got together, we sat down, we had discussions with MassDEP, and it was really the town's decision. And a lot of local residents, I believe, that felt that they did not want it to become a Superfund site. As you heard from Deb and Ron, there are some negative impacts when you name a site that's a Superfund site. So I think that the town did the right thing by going the route that they did. And a lot of credit needs to go to the Attorney General's office for raising historical amounts of money to help clean up that Superfund site in 2014. I mean, in that contaminated waste site in 2014. So I hope that helps. I think that everybody in the town, current members and elected officials, state and federal officials, I think they're all working to get the site cleaned up as quickly as possible. And I know a lot of the residents and folks in town have particular concerns about it. But if anybody has any further questions and need to reach out at the local level, be happy to happy to talk to folks. So,
Thank you, Selectwoman Nyman. So again, we have about a 10-minute warning here. I just want to ask a question from someone new, Debbie or Ron. So this is from Andrew Stella. So instead of using a complex, expensive method of removing water from the pond, why not slowly lower the level as has been done in the past? In 1936 DOT aerial photos, this was a river at the time. There's no reason to keep it a pond that is so high in mercury and lead, drain it, clean it, and then think about making it a pond again.
Okay, so I just wanted to make sure and clarify on before, I know Ron's going to jump into this one, but a couple of things that I said earlier. I just wanted to make sure that it was clear that MassDEP is definitely overseeing this cleanup, and that the PRP, potentially responsible parties, are the ones responsible to perform. We have a semi-privatized system with the MCP, and of course Tetra Tech is working for the responsible parties in conducting the cleanup. So I just wanted to make sure and clarify that piece. So Ron, if you want to jump in, I know that this is definitely a question that you're interested in.
Yeah, I think the gist of the question is, if the water level was lowered, wouldn't it be a whole lot easier to get at the contaminated sediment? And we considered lowering the pond for this work that we talked about tonight in the high metal density area, because if you did lower the pond as far as it would go with the control boards at the current the real dam, factory pond dam, much of the high metal density area would drain off. The choice then was whether to lower the pond level in that way or to put in this porta-dam system to separate the area from the rest of the pond. We, as I said, we started considering lowering the pond and determined pretty quickly that the permitting effort involved in doing that, because it exposes a larger area of land that's currently underwater and exposes that, that is one of the triggers that requires an environmental impact statement be produced before the work is done. And because this work, and there were a number of other triggers that doing the more involved or intrusive approach of draining the pond, even on a temporary basis, ecological, lowering the pond exposes private property in Hanson, and a number of things that in an effort to keep the work going this summer in the high metal density area, that we would not take the approach of lowering the pond and going through that because that permitting effort in all likelihood cannot be completed in time for this work to be done this year. So that approach is still on the table for the final remedy and is being considered. I guess that maybe, did I get to your question there?
I think so, Ron. That was an online question, so I think it was good. So we have
Okay.
about 9 minutes and 3 hands raised. So we'll see if we can do this and with the stop at 8 o'clock. So I'll start with Selectman Luco, then I'm going to go to Heather and then Vi. So Selectman Luco.
Hey, thanks, Joe. I have a question for Deb about the Superfund status. I know we didn't go with Superfund, but at this point where this investigation is so far underway, and Ron and Deb, you both acknowledged that this is just as bad as any military installation cleanup that you've seen. The responsible parties that are negotiating right now, can Hanover feel comfortable that even though we're not technically a Superfund site, that we could see the necessary Superfund style funding to get this done right? With half of this trust money already spent, we definitely need to see a detailed accounting publicly made so people can feel comfortable that it's being done properly. And I know that you have our back now, but you have to understand that the public here is a little bit mistrustful because there were a lot of decades when DEP didn't have our back. I know when I moved to town over 10 years ago, there were walking trails, and it was, supposedly a nice place to go for a walk. So you may have acknowledged that the contamination was there, but at the time it wasn't being taken seriously enough. And now that it is, and we're glad that it is, we just want to make sure it's done in a way that is transparent and done in a way that it's going to get done 100%. Thank you.
So I just wanted to clarify that piece about, we knew the contamination was there. We knew that there was contamination there, but the munitions piece that was really discovered from 2017 forward that Ron from Tetra was talking about, we were absolutely not aware that the munitions that exist out at the site today and have in the last couple of years, in the last few years, we were not aware of that at all. And that, of course, that's an imminent threat. Mercury in the sediment is definitely something that's a threat also, but when you step on munitions that are active, you just don't get any more of an imminent threat than that. So we were not aware of that piece of it. And as I mentioned, and I think Ron mentioned, very, very expensive to do that cleanup action. So there's contamination that's in the sediment. It's in a number of different media, and it's just not safe to walk on the paths. If we believe that there are actually ordnance items out there, and that's also the reason that the pond has been closed also. So just wanted to make sure that piece was understood as far as the ordinance. So Steve, are you asking because I think we got this question earlier, if this site can be switched over to a Superfund site at this point?
No, that the Superfund ship has sailed, and right now
Yeah.
we're on the route that we're on. And I know that you said you're negotiating with the responsible parties. And when the commissioner came out here for the site walk, he said the same thing. And I appreciate that, but can Hanover residents take comfort that even though we didn't get the Superfund classification, that we're still going to get the same attention and the same funding to get this done to that same level?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those funds will definitely come from the potentially responsible parties. And unfortunately, I can't say any more about the negotiations that are currently ongoing, but they are definitely ongoing. And as I mentioned earlier, all the parties are committed to moving forward and trying to move forward as expeditiously as possible. So we're very confident, both MassDEP and the Attorney General's office, that those funds will be secured and will pay for the remainder of cleanup.
Great, Debbie. Thanks, Selectman Luco. Sorry if I had to kick you off there, but we got 2 more questions and 5 more minutes. So let's go. Another question came up. All right, Heather, let's bring Heather in. See if you can ask your question, have it answered pretty quickly so we can get to the last 1 or 2.
Yes, so I appreciate you taking my question again. As far as it sounded like, so we can't do a super fund because again, as a resident, I don't understand why we wouldn't look into that if we have more access to funds, a new set of eyes to look at it. And again, there's still 42% left. So there's still more work to be done. And I feel like if residents here are comfortable and willing to stay, I don't care about a super fund label. I care about the health for my family and everybody else. So if we would have a new set of eyes, more ideas, maybe more contractors that they might have access to, why would we not try to go that route? And I think that that should be something that the town as of now should vote on. I don't think that it should be just a couple of people. I feel as the town, as the residents, we pay the taxes, we should vote and have a say on how we want it managed now.
Thank you for your comments again, Heather. So I'm going to try to get to the last question before Vi. There is, we got 3 minutes here. There's KWG Zoom. I don't know who KWG Zoom is, but it's someone new.
Hello.
Oh, Ken.
Yes, Joe.
Well, thank goodness we didn't overlook you.
Well, I'm glad you didn't either. Listen, I have lived within the vicinity of that location for 90 years, so I'm quite familiar with it. But one of the things that I enjoyed this conversation tonight very much, and it was extremely informative. But I just would like a clarification at a couple points, a couple times during the presentation. One of the hazards that was mentioned in the reason for cleaning it up is that the explosive devices there still pose a potential harm to the people. Now, as I say, I've lived within that area for 90 years. I can never remember once a particular piece of ordnance going off because somebody walked over it. Now, I understand the health issues and all of that, but I don't want to scare people into thinking that because they should walk down that way, they're going to step on something and it's going to explode. I don't think that's going to happen. Thank you, and I appreciate everybody's effort.
Thank you, Ken. Debbie, I don't know if you want to comment on Ken's.
Yeah, hi Ken. Thanks for the looking into that and asking that question. I think Ron is probably the best person to answer that as far as the devices, because he's been out there while this IRA has been going on.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've all been pretty fortunate that in recent years, the use of the site has largely been confined to the old roads and the paths where people walked their dogs and things like that. And the other areas were very much overgrown and were difficult to get into. And so people don't appear to have gotten in there, and they stayed on the paths. And fortunately, those paths were clear of hazardous items. Although when the initial immediate response action was triggered, there was residual thermite on the ground surface, which is very flammable and burns very hot. So while the commenter is correct that a lot of the hazardous items that we've recovered have not been on the ground surface, have been in burial spots and that sort of thing, there also were some hazardous items on the surface, and fortunately, they were in areas that were not well accessible in recent years.
Okay, thank you, Ron. All right, so we have one more question, then we'll wrap up. It's the witching hour here. Mr. Grun, I saw some comments. We'll make sure that all the information does get uploaded to the website. When will the next meeting like this be? We will work on having another one. This was well attended, and I think that the questions were good, and we were able to get some good information. So we will schedule another one in short order. Vi, you are the bookend here. Last question.
I think it's encouraging that there are so many people interested in the cleanup and that there are so many people who are watching it and are concerned that we do the right things when we need to do them. Historically, Heather and there was another gentleman Steve, historically, you allude to the fact that we had people walking on those trails and people using that area for passive recreation or for whatever other purposes. That's been going on for 100 years. The Conservation Commission was involved in some of the trail planning there. My own husband helped build a bridge there with Doug Thompson and a number of other people. They didn't run into any areas that became an issue. As the gentleman from DEP had alluded, there was so much overgrowth that thank God they're all protected. It isn't that the town was lax or that the town government didn't care. We were very concerned for a number of years, Steve, before you got here. And this is something that's been watched over a long period of time. So I just want you to know that we have all had a stake in this, whether we are 90 years old or whether we just were born here. There has been a concern for all the residency, and I'm glad to see that we have the cooperation of DEP, an excellent town selectman, and a town manager who are making sure this all comes to fruition. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vi. Thank you, Debbie. Thank you, Ron. And thank you, everyone who attended and stayed with us. It was an excellent 2 hours, great information, and we'll do this again soon. Thank you so much. Good night.
Thanks, Phil. Good night. Good night,
Bye.
everyone.